Hi, I'm Rachel, and I just returned from Yom Kippur services. I had my breakfast and everything, and now I'm in the year 5779. The Jewish high holidays are a time of reflection and introspection, looking over the past year's mistakes, asking forgiveness, and mapping out a course for the future. And in that vein of at least looking back on events of the past, I thought I would take this time to do my book haul for September 2018. I usually do my book hauls a bit closer to the end of the month, but this book haul is very special. This book haul is of the 6 books that were part of the DC Library's banned book scavenger hunt. Every year in September, the DC Public Library, at least for the past 4 years, has instigated a scavenger hunt of banned books in the DC area to coincide with the American Library Association's Banned Books Week, which is next week. And they'll also release the top banned books in the country in that week. And so what the DC Library does is that it thinks up a theme, and it then picks 6 books coinciding with that theme that have been banned in places in the US or banned in places abroad. And they put special covers on the books so you know that they're part of the game, and the spines of the book all make a special picture, which you could see in my thumbnail pic. And they hide them in various local businesses around the city. It's definitely in part to encourage local commerce, and then they also hide them in library branches. And every day the local radio station puts out a little clue in a limerick form, and people take to social media to talk about where they found books. And this year the library particularly encouraged posting hot tips under that hashtag to encourage people to play with each other, basically. Not just go it alone and get your 6 books and you're done, but you know, give hints about where you find books that you already have, that other people can find them as well, because I believe there's about 600 books out there, I think, 100 of each title, or at least that's how it was last year when I did this hunt back then. So I'll link to my haul video from last September down below too. This year's theme is called Words Ignite, which, like everything, at first I tended to think of in terms of the Trump administration, but actually I was wrong. And in a podcast, or a radio show really, a couple of the librarians explained the inspiration for this year's theme, which has to do with something Dr. King, MLK, was attempting to get off the ground around the time that he was assassinated 50 years ago. My God, time flies. Anyway, this is a diverse collection of books this year. We have fiction and nonfiction, young adult fiction for the fiction, graphic novels, and poetry. A nice wide array of books having to do with the theme of activism. So I thought I'd show them to you with the special covers, and also tell you a bit about where I found them, and give you a taste of DC life. So this first book I found on my lunch break, because you know, the spirit of the hunt just really gets into you, or it got into me, and I was like, I just can't go another day without finding a book, and so I'll just, instead of eating, dash down to the nearest indie bookshop where people had been finding some books, and see what I can find. And I asked the booksellers if there was anything around, and you know, they gave me the affirmative, and I went searching into the stacks, and I found this one. This is the nice, pretty cover art for this title, which I will now show you. It's The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, a very seminal nonfiction work that I'm excited to now own and get to read, and I will read from the back. A national bestseller when it first appeared in 1963, The Fire Next Time galvanized the nation and gave a passionate voice to the emerging civil rights movement. At once a powerful evocation of James Baldwin's early life in Harlem and a disturbing examination of the consequences of racial injustice, The Fire Next Time is an intensely personal and provocative document. It consists of 2 letters written on the occasion of the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation that exhorts Americans, both black and white, to attack the terrible legacy of racism. Described by the New York Times Book Review as sermon, ultimatum, confession, deposition, testament, and chronicle, all presented in searing, brilliant prose. Baldwin's masterwork stands as a classic of our literature and as urgent today as when it was written. And indeed, it's making me think of the more recent continuation of this, The Fire Next Time, with essays collated by Jessamine Ward, if I remember correctly. These next three books I found all in a row, wham, 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 early in the morning on Saturday. I wanted to get a big head start on this stuff, given clues, and I found them all like 1 hour after the other, but early in the morning, and then alas, the rest of my searching for the day went nowhere, but at least I got these three. Starting, I went to a coffee shop that is in a prestigious downtown DC hotel. The hotel is the Line Hotel DC, and the coffee place where people had been finding books is The Cup We All Race For. And this is what I found. This is March, Book 1 by Congressman John Lewis. It is a graphic novel about the civil rights movement, and I will read from the flap. Congressman John Lewis is an American icon, one of the key figures of the civil rights movement. His commitment to justice and nonviolence has taken him from an Alabama sharecropper's farm to the halls of Congress, from a segregated schoolroom to the 1963 March on Washington, and from receiving beatings from state troopers to receiving the Medal of Freedom from the first African-American president. Now, to share his remarkable story with new generations, John Lewis presents March, a graphic novel trilogy, in collaboration with co-writer Andrew Aden and New York Times best-selling artist Nate Powell, winner of the Eisner Award and LA Times Book Prize finalist for Swallow Me Whole. And March is a vivid first-hand account of John Lewis's lifelong struggle for civil and human rights, meditating in the modern age on the distance traveled since the days of Jim Crow and segregation. Rooted in Lewis's personal story, it also reflects on the highs and lows of the broader civil rights movement. Book 1 spans John Lewis's youth in rural Alabama, his life-changing meeting with Martin Luther King Jr., the birth of the Nashville student movement, and their battle to tear down segregation through nonviolent lunch counter sit-ins, building to a stunning climax on the steps of City Hall. Many years ago, John Lewis and other student activists drew inspiration from the 1958 comic book Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story. Now his own comics bring those days to life for a new audience, testifying to a movement whose echoes will be heard for generations. So this sounds like important U.S. history in a fun form. So looking forward to it. From there, I went to Solid State Books, which is another DC indie bookstore. In fact, I first heard about it last year when it was getting its feet off the ground in the last banned books hunt, and now they're finally in their official storefront and everything. And anyway, I found this book. This is Persepolis, the story of a childhood, another graphic novel by Marjane Satrapi, and I will read from the flap. Wise, funny, and heartbreaking, Persepolis is Marjane Satrapi's memoir of growing up in Iran during the Islamic Revolution. In powerful black and white comic strip images, Satrapi tells the story of her life in Tehran from ages 6 to 14, years that saw the overthrow of the Shah's regime, the triumph of the Islamic Revolution, and the devastating effects of war with Iraq. The intelligent and outspoken only child of committed Marxists and the great-granddaughter of one of Iran's last emperors, Marjane bears witness to a childhood uniquely entwined with the history of her country. Persepolis paints an unforgettable portrait of daily life in Iran and of the bewildering contradictions between home life and public life. Marjane's child-eye view of dethroned emperors, state-sanctioned whippings, and heroes of the revolution allows us to learn, as she does, the history of this fascinating country and of her own extraordinary family. Intensely personal, profoundly political, and wholly original, Persepolis is at once a story of growing up and a reminder of the human cost of war and political repression. It shows how we carry on with laughter and tears in the face of absurdity. And finally, it introduces us to an irresistible little girl with whom we cannot help but fall in love. So yeah, all of that sounds brilliant, and I'm particularly happy that we get to move outside of the American borders and learn about someplace new. And finally, on that Saturday, I went to a Politics and Prose outcropping store. Politics and Prose is DC's largest indie bookstore, and within the last year they opened a couple of new smaller branches in some places, and this one is in Union Market, and on their stacks I found this book. This is a YA novel, Yaki Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass by Meg Medina. And I have this memory a few years ago of Meg Medina being at the National Book Festival, and my friend was waiting in her line for a while to get this book signed. But I got a free copy! I'll read from the back. Yaki Delgado wants to kick your ass. That's what some girl tells Pity Sanchez one morning. Pity doesn't even know who Yaki Delgado is or what she's done to piss her off. But Yaki isn't kidding around. Pity tries to focus on finding out more about the father she's never met, and balancing honors courses with her job at the neighborhood hair salon, but avoiding Yaki and her gang starts to take over Pity's life. She is forced to decide exactly who she is versus who others are trying to make her become, and ultimately discovers a rhythm that is all her own. That's cool and interesting. It's a look into Latina culture in America, and I'm particularly relieved because this is in English, and I heard from one of the librarians posting on Twitter that there were also Spanish copies out there, which is great. It's great to have the dual language thing, but admittedly my Spanish is not good enough to carry me through a YA book, so huzzah for English. Next, well, a few days later, I was listening to the podcast radio show that I mentioned earlier that I linked down below, and near the end of that, one of the librarians dropped a hint that I decided to decipher and go chase down that led me to the Woodbridge branch of the library, where I found this book. And this one, oh my goodness, I'm kind of surprised that rabid fans didn't chase them all down on day one. This is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. It's still in its hardback form, the only hardback of this collection, because I think it's that popular that it hasn't gotten a paperback yet. Just in time for the movie coming out next month, and I will read from the flap. 16-year-old Star Carter moves between two worlds, the poor black neighborhood where she lives and the fancy suburban prep school she attends. The uneasy balance between these worlds is shattered when Star witnesses the fatal shooting of her childhood best friend, Khalil, at the hands of a police officer. Khalil was unarmed. Soon afterward, Khalil's death is a national headline. Some are calling him a thug, maybe even a drug dealer and a gangbanger. Star's best friend at school suggests he may have had it coming. When it becomes clear that the police have little interest in investigating the incident, protesters take to the streets, and Star's neighborhood becomes a war zone. What everyone wants to know is, what really went down that night? And the only person alive who can answer that is Star. But what Star does or does not say could destroy her community. It could also endanger her life. Angie Thomas's searing debut about an ordinary girl in extraordinary circumstances addresses issues of racism and police violence with intelligence, heart, and unflinching honesty. So, yeah, I've been wanting to read this for a while. I knew I'd be interested in seeing the movie, and this is about very prescient issues of our time with police violence against unarmed black men. So what a treat to have a copy of this book from the banned book hunt. And finally, well, a few days after that, I went to one of the branches of a local coffee chain, Compass Coffee. They're major partners of this. People tend to find books there every day, and I was doing a little bit of research because I was down to having to find one particular book, and the Compass Coffee seemed to have a lot of those recently, so my luck came to me one morning before work when I got a cup of coffee, and this book. This is the selected poetry of Langston Hughes. So exciting! I almost wish I'd found it at a Busboys and Poets location, which is another local food chain which is named for Hughes. And anyway, I will read from the back. With the publication of his first book of poems, The Weary Blues, in 1926, Langston Hughes electrified readers and launched a renaissance in black writing in America. The poems Hughes wrote celebrated the experience of invisible men and women, of slaves who brushed the boots of Washington, of musicians on Lenox Avenue, of the poor and the lovesick, of losers in the raffle of night. They conveyed that experience in a voice that blended the spoken with the sung, that turned poetic lines into the phrases of jazz and blues, and that rippled through the curtain separating high from popular culture. They spanned the range from the lyric to the polemic, ringing out wonder and pain and terror, and the marrow of the bone of life. The poems in this collection were chosen by Hughes himself shortly before his death in 1967, and represent work of his entire career, including The Negro Speaks of Rivers, The Weary Blues, Still Here, Song for a Dark Girl, Montage of a Dream Deferred, and Refugee in America. It gives us a poet of extraordinary range, directness, and stylistic virtuosity. So I'm thinking this would be a great read for April and National Poetry Month. I admit it probably won't take me that long to get to this book, but I do plan to get to all 6 of the books. Earlier this year I read all of the books from last year's banned book hunt, and really enjoyed the experience, so here's to doing that again soon. So that about covers it for me now. So this was my second year doing the hunt, and it was a lot of fun, and I did find new places in the city, new businesses to try out and to get to know a bit better, which is always fun. Admittedly, I do get a bit stressed a little bit when I'm in the middle of the hunt. It is very competitive. There's a lot of people searching, and at least the handful of books that seem to be posted every day tend to go pretty fast. But it's all in good fun, and it's a great way to celebrate the love of reading and reading what you want to read, not to have books banned, because the power of access to knowledge, which is the librarian code, and I'm so grateful to the DC Public Library for putting this together, and it's such a big hit that I hope that they can continue to do it for years to come, and in which case I will be back next year to check in about the next hunt. In the meantime, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.